Welcome to the Remnant Trust at IPFW. The Remnant Trust is a private foundation located in Jeffersonville, Indiana. They own over 900 first and early edition significant historical works. We're lucky enough to have 53 of those works here on campus, along with 2 of our own from the IPFW Helmke Library. I'm Dr. Pat Ashton. I teach sociology and peace and conflict studies here at IPFW. I've studied these works, taught about them for many years, but I've also recently researched the particular stories behind these books. I'd like to share those with you. Let's take a look together at the Remnant Trust at IPFW. The first work you'll encounter when you enter the Remnant Trust is the Samuel Johnson Dictionary. This dictionary is 2 volumes of this size, a massive work. Up until 1755, there was no dictionary of the English language, no comprehensive dictionary of the English language. Samuel Johnson wrote the first one. You can see it's an incredible work. He did this by reading widely over 1,500 different books that he wrote in pencil in the margins, his initials, and underlining passages. He gave them to then 6 assistants who wrote the passages down on pieces of paper. Can you imagine the pieces of paper that it took to write 2 volumes of this size? So Johnson is defining every word in the English language at the time and then showing it in context. Well, the one who gets to do the defining, of course, gets to shape the definitions. Johnson's father was a bookseller and a maker of parchment. He had a lot of trouble with the tax people who insisted on putting excise tax on his parchment. So when it came to defining words like excise, here's what Johnson said. Excise, a hateful tax levied upon commodities, and adjudged not by the common judges of property, but wretches hired by those to whom the excise is paid. So, if you're the one defining, you get to define the words. But beyond that, it's a work of incredible intellectual achievement by Johnson. This actually belongs to the IPFW library and is housed here in the library. We're lucky enough to have this. The Remnant Trust exhibition is organized around 7 themes that were developed by faculty committees. The first theme I want to tell you about is the development of the American character. In this area, we have books that are seminal to defining what it means to be an American. The first document that we have in the development of the American character is a journal of the Continental Congress. This is the complete first edition journal of everything that the Continental Congress did in attempting to lay out a plan for possibly a new country. This includes the first printing of the Bill of Rights, which they discussed in great detail, which of course later became the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Next we have Common Sense, a book by Thomas Paine, a very famous supporter of the American Revolution. Paine was not born in the colonies. He met Benjamin Franklin in London, and Franklin, realizing that Paine was sympathetic, suggested he come to America and support the revolution. Franklin got him a job as a journalist in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And Paine, as a fervent supporter of democracy, wrote this book, Common Sense. This is the 6th edition, but also published in 1776, because Paine wrote this book for the common person. He didn't write it in academic language. He wrote it in language that was accessible to ordinary people. It sold an amazing number of copies, and they had to constantly keep reprinting it. In fact, it sold over 500,000 copies. Today, they say that would be equivalent to 75 million books in today's market. This was a bestseller. Everybody read it. This particular copy that we have, as I said, was the 6th edition, the first published in England. Well, you can imagine this book was rather incendiary, as it criticized the king for his terrible actions toward the colonies. Well, the printer in England was very concerned that some of these incendiary passages might get him in trouble and get him arrested. So he simply left them out. Here's an example of one of the hiatuses, the blank spots in this book, in this edition, not in the American edition. All of this is in the American edition, but here he left out the parts that he thought might be offensive to the king. So I've done the research, and let me just tell you what's missing here, what the printer thought was so bad, so dangerous, that he dare not print it. He wrote, "However, it matters very little now what the King of England either says or does. He has wickedly broken through every moral and human obligation, trampled nature and conscience beneath his feet, and by a steady and constitutional spirit of insolence and cruelty procured for himself a universal hatred." Well, not very nice about the king, huh? You can see why that was maybe left out. But this is an example of censorship, of a restriction of freedom that was self-imposed by the printer in England. Paine would not have been happy about this. Thomas Paine also says in this book, in America, the law is king. We'll be talking more about Thomas Paine. He figures in some of the other books and documents that we have in this exhibition. Next, we have the book of the Federalist Papers. I'd like to ask people that come through the exhibition, how many non-presidents are on U.S. money? I'm sure you all know that George Washington is on our $1 bill. But how many people that are on our money are not presidents? Well, I'll bet, especially all the young people know, that Benjamin Franklin is on the $100 bill. The other person is Alexander Hamilton, who is on the $10 bill, was the first Secretary of the Treasury. On the back of the $10 bill is the Treasury building, right next to the White House. Now, another important question to ask is, how many presidents were of the United States, the early presidents of the United States, were not born in the U.S.? It's a trick question, of course, because the United States didn't exist when George Washington was born, for instance. It's actually not until the 8th president, Martin Van Buren. He was the first one born in the actual United States. But the other presidents, of course, were born in the 13 colonies. Alexander Hamilton was not. He was born on the island of Nevis in the Caribbean. His parents were not married, which was a scandal, and they were traders. And they abandoned Alexander Hamilton, actually, and he was adopted by a man named Alexander Kruger, who sent him to what later became Columbia University in New York, where Hamilton was a brilliant student, managed to get a law degree in his early 20s. He joined very heartily in support of the American Revolution, and in order to try to get the Constitution adopted by his state, New York State, he and John Jay and James Madison wrote a number of papers arguing for the Constitution. They were, in 1788, published in book form, called The Federalist. They were written anonymously at first, but later it was disclosed that most of them were indeed written by Alexander Hamilton. Now, Hamilton could not be president, but he made an excellent first Treasury Secretary. But Hamilton argued for a strong central government. Jefferson, of course, wanted a maximum of decentralized democracy. Agrarian democracy was Jefferson's vision. In 1800, the presidential election, Jefferson was running for president. Hamilton was not inclined to support him. But running against Jefferson was Aaron Burr. Hamilton disliked Aaron Burr even more. So he threw his support to Jefferson, and that was crucial in Jefferson winning the presidency in 1800. Burr didn't take this very well. If you think politics are dirty today, politics are slimy, you haven't seen anything. When Burr lost the election, he challenged Hamilton to a duel. And in that duel, he shot Hamilton to death. The story is that Hamilton, being a gentleman, shot into the air. Burr, being vindictive, shot him dead. We don't know, but certainly that's some serious politics there. We don't encourage this in a democratic society. But that was the end of Alexander Hamilton. Next to him, we have, most appropriately, Jefferson's Notes on the State of Virginia. This is Jefferson's only book-length work. Jefferson actually finished this book while he was ambassador to France. He succeeded Benjamin Franklin as ambassador to France. Jefferson, of course, was so involved in the founding of the country. He served 2 legislative positions at the state level. He was governor of the state of Virginia. He had 2 executive positions, president and ambassador to France, and he, of course, was also a member of the U.S. Congress. This book, Notes on the State of Virginia, is one of the best books of the period in letting us know what life was like in the 13 colonies. And historians tell us it holds up very well today. This is a first edition copy of that book. Here we have one of the most cherished parts of the exhibition, a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Not the kind that's in the version that's in the National Archives that Nicolas Cage looked at on the back, see if there's a treasure map, but that's called the broadside edition, and that was published on 1 page, so it could be put up like a poster all over on walls so that the maximum number of people could read it. This version is part of the journal of the Continental Congress. There's only 3 copies of this in existence. Only 1 full copy, which is in Philadelphia, and 2 partials. And this is one of the 2 partials, the only one in private hands, owned by the Remnant Trust. So this records what the Continental Congress was doing around the time they passed the Declaration of Independence. Printed in here then is the Declaration as passed by Congress with a list of the signers of the Declaration. Now, 1 copy of each of this was printed for each of the 13 colonies. So we know that there were 13 copies originally in what's called the 3rd Dunlop printing. John Dunlop was a Philadelphia printer who printed the broadside editions and printed the journal editions. In this 3rd edition, he printed 1 for each of the 13 colonies. 10 of them have disappeared. Perhaps destroyed by the British, perhaps locked away in attics and forgotten about, perhaps lost, who knows. 3 copies in existence. This particular copy has handwriting on it. So 1 congressional delegate was using this to record the votes at a session of Congress. We have no idea what the vote was about, but written in pencil next to people's names are notes about who is present, who is absent, who is for the bill, and who is against it. It simply says for it, not for it. The writing occurs only in the Delaware and Pennsylvania delegations. So we're pretty sure it has to be someone from Delaware or Pennsylvania who was counting the votes. Given that most of the people are not present or not for it, and that the largest for it seems to be written after Benjamin Franklin's name, it is entirely possible that these are Benjamin Franklin's notes that he was taking as he counted the votes in Congress. So you never know where your scribbling will wind up in the future. So not only is this a historical document of the Declaration, but also of the writing of at least one of our so-called founding fathers, if not Franklin, certainly one of the other people on this list of signers. The Remnant Trust at IPFW will not go on forever, but the ideas contained in these works most certainly will. I'm Pat Ashton. Thanks for joining me on this tour of the Remnant Trust at IPFW.